All right. Hi, and welcome everyone. We're excited for our webinar bi-weekly series to talk about decentralized identity today. With me, I have an amazing alignment of speakers. Our first speaker is Rouven Heck, who's the head of the identity R&D at ConsenSys, and he's also the executive director at the Decentralized Identity Foundation. Our second speaker is Snorre Lothar von Goren Edwin, and I hope I pronounced the name correctly, who has co-founded and is the CTO of Dwala, which aims at solving for some of the issues we'll talk about today. And then last but not least, we have Balázs Németi, who is leading operation at the Decentralized Identity Foundation. So some of you may know decentralized identity is critical to the development of social impact solutions, especially reaching the last mile. And today we're going to start our webinar with Snorre, who has deployed a solution which will make us understand how complicated, decentralized identity is, and what are the challenges on the ground, and what problem he's actually trying to solve for this. So I'll let Snorre start, and then I'll ask everyone to mute themselves, or else I will mute them so that we don't have any background noise during our discussion. We're going to have several presentations, but please feel free to ask all your questions in the chat, and we'll take those questions as they come along. And this, expect this to be an open conversation. Thank you.
Perfect. I think that you, Balázs, might have a little bit thought about the intro here. So there might be some words you wanted to say before I get going. Or Rouven?
No, I think it was already, Vanessa gave the intro, so we are actually right at your presentation now.
Perfect. Then we continue to me. I'm the one sharing screen, so I'm in control here. Perfect. Then it's the use case of Dwala. I'll just kick it off. We're Dwala. We are redefining skill verification for the 21st century. We have gotten some nice words from the ICT Minister of Education in Uganda. That is a game changer for African continent. It's actually a game changer for the whole world, but since we are focusing on African continent, that's where we get our feedback. There are 1.8 billion people living without an identity, and that's also a lot of the things that the Decentralized Identity Foundation is aware of, and a lot of the members there is aware of. But there's also a lot of people that's not capable of proving their education and work history. The African workforce represents about 500 million people today, and not getting access to a job is communicated as their main challenge. So the problem is why people are stuck being underdeployed. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and one of them is actually there's no trust in the verification process they're having today. Without the proper verification on identity and a proper way of credentialing yourself, you really can't showcase what you have achieved the last couple of 3 to 5 years to be able to get that job you want. So people become underemployed. So they're fighting for every opportunity they have. They're constantly being judged by perception, and they think they're being judged as they're not skilled and not educated. But that's, from our experience, is quite wrong. We see a lot of people who's super skilled and eager to get ahead and get the job they feel they're qualified for. So today, there's actually a very known process from that employers, they pay $15 per verification, not to a service, but if they get a person applying directly, they cannot trust that person's papers, so they have to go to every source they are struggling with, or want to see the trustworthiness of this type of paper, and pay to get a verified copy from that source who initially initiated that paper to the applicant. It's estimated that they spend about 250 hours minimum per year, and that process, since there's so many bottlenecks and so many extra people involved in that verification, it can take up to 3 to 6 months. And the thing is that's really weird is that all these applicants, and when you're going to get your school paper or you're going to get your other type of verification papers that's related to your skill, there's so many signatures involved because they want to build the trust. They want to build that need for trust. So they're like, okay, you got to go to that and that department to get that stamp and that signature to get the paper approved. But in the end, when they delivered off these papers, they're not trusted by the person looking at it because there's a lot of processes and that has gone wrong. So we want to really tackle this issue because we have seen Africa as the world's fastest growing labor force. The young people there are dedicated to do a change. They're dedicated to possess skills and solve problems to fuel the economic growth of their country. We see that they have internet everywhere, so they're starting to use the big wide internet to gather their skills and be able to get the knowledge they need to kind of fuel their the economic growth of their country. So why now? Like we talked about talent that people are engaged to really go at it. Educators, the schools that do issue the initial or like one of your first verification papers, they have a very outdated process. They also receive a very heavy administrative load when they need to issue a copy because they not trust that initial paper that was issued. And employers, they need access to the right talent because the country needs to grow. Their economic growth needs to really set speed. And when they use like 3 to 6 months to find the right talent because of a verification process, it's the wrong place that it kind of starts hinder. And for the government, you see that there's a lot of you have the problem of brain drain. People want skills. People want to be able to achieve knowledge and then use it. But there's a lot of issues with the right education, and also seeing that if I go to this school, I'm not going to get a job because it's going to be a lengthy process for me to even get there. People start seeking education outside of their country and Africa, and then they gather knowledge, like the really skilled people gather knowledge in Europe, America, or other countries, and then they might not end up coming back and utilizing their knowledge and skills into the country they came from. So that's what lays in the problem of brain drain. And that's where, but we talked to some of these students that did go abroad. They really want to go back and kind of utilize their skills there, but they see it as too big of a hinder, and they stay where it's easier to get a job. And also it's a country that has the biggest growth, and a lot of people see investment possibilities in this country or countries. Let's not talk about Africa as one country. It's a continent, but we are focusing on Uganda, so I get a little bit mixed there. But that's where Diwala comes in. We come in with a digital solution that's based on decentralized identity. We want to make it easy for employers to verify job applicants. We want to make it happen in seconds. We want to make it happen digitally. We want to make it happen securely and safe for every party involved. Also for schools, we want to make it super easy for them to do issuance of their credentials. So that we have built a couple of solutions where they do sign off digitally with their mobile phone, so it's a cryptographic signature. We're going to go deeper into the specifications around how you do it when you intro the SSI. But it's a simple couple clicks that makes you sign off a credential. We also made it so that it's possible to have it on a paper based version, so that because there's still some culture involved. So we want to cater to that as well. So the signature moves fast. They don't anymore. They don't need water stamped paper from London to print out their certificates anymore, because they can get the security they need via cryptography, which is why we love blockchain and cryptography. And also the students have a very simple, easy way to see their, you can basically call this a skill wallet, but there's a lot of other options there as well. And very easy to kind of get the information you need compared to before, because then things hasn't been digital to now. So it's an inclusive technology. We want to really work with the young talent to connect with the job market. So we're working with all three aspects of the ecosystem. And we want the data that we are showcasing to be trustworthy, and that's where the decentralized identity comes in. So the ecosystem consists of schools and educators. It consists of students, alumni, and employers, and then also employers. So consists of employee and employers. And if you put this into a more SSI context, which we will hear more about later, you have the student, alumni, and employee are holders, which is a very common term. Like, they are the data holders. They receive data and they showcase it. Here, both the school and educators and employers can work as both issuers and verifiers. Our first step is that schools and educators are the issuers of data, and the employers are the verifiers. But we look to expand further on to basically create follow you along your whole life to build the skill identity you deserve. So we are still young in terms of number of users. We are starting to get tractions. We are working with a lot of interesting companies. So there's things happening. It's a difficult market to enter, and there's catering for three portals is also difficult. So things can be rough at times, but we're getting there. So we were the first ever digital verified credential backed by blockchain in Africa. Basically the first company to issue SSI credentials in Africa, which was interesting. And just some pictures of us working, which is, we do see understanding from a lot of people we work with. They are quite eager to leapfrog to the next level, because we see here in Norway and Europe, we have centralized solutions for verifying credentials, but that's still based on a centralized solution. So if we're able to get to SSI, we can really leapfrog to the next level of data sharing. Just some quick roadmap, and again, we want to, as you see in 2021, we really want to look at how digital courses can be verified, how we can work with them to properly create trustworthy data from digital courses. And we also want to look at how employers can start issuing to really create your skill identity, which is what we want to do. We want to use SSI to build up your data portfolio of skill records and make it easy and shareable for everybody. So that's us, not just me.
Thank you so much. Snart, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So what role played the decentralized identity in your solution, and why was it so important for you to roll out a decentralized identity as opposed to other forms of digital experience?
So one of the key aspects here was that we wanted to help, now that we targeted Uganda as our first market, we want to make sure that they stay ahead. that they don't go and walk up the same path as Norway has done and say, okay, we build a centralized verification solution, and of course it works, it creates value. But now that there are possibilities to do this with SSI as well. It's not super complicated. Of course, if you want to go deep into revocation and complex issuing, you get into the complex stuff, but we can create value with quite simple SSI solutions, and that takes them, lets us put Uganda one step ahead of the current situation.
Understood. And when you were rolling out your solution, did the fact that it had decentralized identity and encryption facilitate or increase the trust amongst the players and the people who were looking for jobs?
We actually saw that they liked to talk about, or they did trust it more, but we did have to make some solutions to hide a little bit of the complexity, to kind of handhold them along the way. But it did increase trust, and we do see on the verifier side that, okay, this is based off of proper technology, and that's also part of our marketing focus, is that, okay, we are part of DIF, and we know what this is all about, and we work with the right technologies to make sure that we back us up of the technologies that make internet secure. And this is something that creates a higher trust for every party in the ecosystem.
Great. We have a question from the audience, from Adrian, who would love to partner with Diwala for a project in Latin America. Would you be the best person to chat with about this?
You can send me an email on my first name @diwala.io, and we can take it onwards and have that discussion. Right now we are focusing on Africa, but we'll see what is possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Snorre. And we're going to move on to the next set of presentations, where we're going to dive more into, the DIF standards. What does decentralized identity mean from a technical perspective? And, Snorre, you mentioned you were part of the Decentralized Identity Foundation. Why is it so critical to have this type of foundation to have a lot of players work together? So with that, I will turn it to Vilash. If you want to share your screen, yeah, that's good. Okay, and I'll let him do that introduction.
Awesome, thank you very much, and thank you, Snorre. Yeah, in regarding, so I'm working for the Decentralized Identity Foundation. I lead operations, and our idea of doing this presentation was that Snorre gives basically a useful use case for decentralized identity, and I would follow up with the little bit more technical and a little bit more what it is all about and what is the larger scheme beyond just like one use case, and why there are so many companies and so many discussions are popping up in different places, also related to privacy and also other aspects of our digital life. And then Rouven will come in at the end with talking about the foundation, how it works, and cover everything that I might have missed. So with that, basically decentralized identities or self-sovereign identities, the term that you might have heard, started to come around very strongly about 4.5 years ago, somewhat before the foundation was started. And the conversation came up about 50 years ago when the internet was created, because when it was created, it's a long legend, but the identity was not a perspective. And so since the beginning, all the founders of the internet knew that identity is not solved, and it still has certain issues, the digital identity space. However, over time, and with the boom of the internet, all our interactions basically got digitalized. So we have a huge footprint on the internet, but how we manage it or who is managing it and what is where is unclear, cluttered, and logged away in different places that we have very little knowledge or access to. And sort of basically what it means that there are two major still like current systems that are holding or managing our identities. There are siloed systems where you can log in. I'm gonna primarily talk about our digital interactions, where you can log in, you have a user password, and you can interact with services related to that login, but it's usually very limited, and you have no means of actually moving any of the data that would have been there or interact with other services that are similar to the one that you are using. And then there is the other category on the right side, the known social media platforms or online giants that enable you to use their platform as a sort of like shared registry, but they sit on the data, and we all know that these services are free for the reason that they also use that data for other reasons than just enabling you to access certain services. I will take questions at the end. So basically from here, what are we talking about why is it important that we are bringing this concept of this decentralized identity? And the major importance that you should remember and sort of take home is that the current system is built around companies and organizations managing your identity. And what the proposal of the whole concept is that we can put the user into the center, and the user is doing the collection and attestation and moving the data between services and not other organization on behalf of the user. So basically just like creating this mechanism from moving a service-centric to a user-centric system. And sort of like the question, like, why is it important? Why would we think of, it works pretty well, I can log in with Facebook pretty much anywhere in the internet, Apple is rolling out services, like, why does it matter? And sort of the answer is that like, there are so many services that we don't think on a daily basis that still rely on these same concepts, that if anything happens, we lose connection to those data points that might be important or might not be, but we definitely lose connection. So by having a proof of doing something in the past or doing something currently can be beneficial if you can use it in the future. And with that, we are sort of arriving to the concept of like web of trust. This is also a broadly used terms, means a lot of things. How here I'm trying to use it is more like creating this mechanism where your services can interact on your behalf. You can interact with different services or different users. And essentially there is no central authority that oversees all these interactions. So there is no big brother in the system. Everything is more in a peer-to-peer basis, creating like more trustable, but in other ways it's less trust. There is less trust needed to create these systems. The question, of course, like which service providers you trust, but that's a question for later. Important features you can sort of already probably read on the slide. As I said, it's about the user. It's circled around the user. It's portable, so there is no vendor lock-in. There are no siloed databases, and it's verifiable, so that you can prove that it was signed, digitally signed by the other party. And there is another term we use a lot in the industry, interoperability, which enables portability, so that service systems are essentially using the same standards, so that you can move between different services. I think Rouven will talk more about it. Privacy, I hope I don't need to talk that much about it, as well as security. And I also think that by being an open source movement and open source community, it is very important for us that not just one company, one organization looks at security, but essentially the whole internet has the opportunity to go on GitHub and actually look all the security questions and privacy questions that some might have. And everyone is welcome to contribute. Then a little bit how it works in a more lifelike situation for humans, because also it's important to note that decentralized identities are not just for humans. It can replace any form of identity that is used digitally at the moment. So user creates an identity or might have one. Generally speaking, you probably in the future will not have only one decentralized identity, but multiple ones. There is an authentication, who you are, you own it, these questions, and essentially you have the ability to start connecting attestations or proof that you have access to something, you own something, you did something. And the power comes in here that now, once you own these, you can go to a service and you can prove that you own this, you did it, you've been there, and the service can enable you to do something without the issuing party knowing it. So basically you are the intermediary, and your consent is required to share data, to move information, to prove something without notifying the issuer party. Generally speaking, there are a lot of like fine-grained details. This is like a first overview. And then what makes it tick? Where is the technology? Because we were told that the group is a bit more technical. So I'm going to go a little bit into it. If someone is more interested, we are happy to talk about it at the foundation. So basically there are two key components for a decentralized identity, or two building blocks that are important that makes it work. There is the decentralized identifier standard maintained by W3C, and the verifiable credential standard also maintained by W3C. These are the building blocks that enables these concept of self-managed, self-owned identities to take place. Verifiable credentials are very self-evident terminology. These are credentials that someone can verify. It can be self-verified, it can be a verifier party on behalf of an interaction. And basically they are temper evident or digitally signed claims. And what's important on the other side, the decentralized identifiers, they are basically the newness in this whole identity system that follows the previous models that I've earlier discussed, is the mechanism to create a globally resolvable unique identity that you can use to interact with services using verifiable credentials. So it's basically, in part, simplified as a public key that you can use in many places. Not simplified, it's a pointer system to verifiable credentials and different data storage points where you enable the other party who wants to interact with you to find the right information through this publicly findable piece of information. I hope it made sense. I will learn it from the chat. And all the other things that I just sort of left there with gray, there are many other parts of this stack that needs to work together to make it into an interoperable working system. And why I didn't remove them, because I'm not gonna talk about them, but I wanted you to know that there are so many other pieces that are not as important as these two, but if they are not there, we can't talk about a fully working, operating decentralized identity stack. Very simply, Snorre already talked about it. Basically, there is an issuer, there is a holder, and there is a verifier. This is how a verifiable credential is working. And then identifier registries, in our case, is the decentralized identities, decentralized identifiers that can help these organizations to resolve their questions and find proofs on organizations or parties. Regarding these DID methods or decentralized identifiers, so there are a lot already. It's rather easy to create a new one. There are differences between, they are interacting with different ledgers. Some are public, some are not public. They have differences. They have a lot of differences. I can't say that there is better or worse because I'm working for the foundation, but there are differences. And if anyone is interested, there is a lot of work going into it on making, comparing these processes, because some are more privacy conscious than others. And that might be an important key. And why are we doing this, right? So why all these companies around the world putting in so much effort on creating something that sounds rather simple and almost doable with current technologies. So the reason is that the internet doesn't really have identity, and we are coming up with alternative solutions like Facebook login and stuff like that. So I just simplified. There is a lot more points what we could bring in here, but basically for individuals or humans, there is a single sign-on function. Just think about like Facebook login without Facebook. There is no big brother behind you when you're logging in. You can even potentially store data and use without a password to access services in a much higher level of trust than currently you do, plus less passwords. Selectively disclosed, essentially you have the ability to share selected information. It's not all or nothing as it's currently. And seamless onboarding is the combination of these two. You can prove, you authenticate that you are you, and then with that, you can also selectively disclose certain informations and get onboarded to services without any friction, which leads us to the enterprises or businesses, why it's interesting to implement or think about it. There is a reduced friction. Getting new users is simpler and faster. There is a higher trust. There is a lower cost because it's less friction. And because of this raised trust level, there is also lower risks for businesses, as well as less requirement to store data because they can just rely on verifiable credentials, proving that somewhere there is verified data. So for a small website, it could be that they don't need to store my name. They can just believe that I have a name because they might not be interested in my name, which is a personal private information, which they would need to GDPR comply with. And then for governments, sort of like they are the ultimate enterprise. Secure access, simple and easy. Interoperability, it works. There is no silo. There is no one organization managing the entire system that can go into directions that the government might not support. And essentially, it can be the framework for a governmental digital ID framework, enabling all citizens to interact without Big Brother effect. And governments plus similar organizations, you can think of other like governed bodies that could very much benefit from these systems. And I know it was a lot, so I hope there are a lot of questions. And yeah.
Yeah, they
shall
are.
I answer questions now, or shall we let Rouven finish the foundation and maybe follow?
I'm going to ask you one question, and then
Okay.
Rouven, I think, wants to address some of two of the technical questions that came up. So my general question is, where are we in the journey of the sort of maturation of the technology, and where do you think we can get to, with all the components you spoke about that have to come together, let's say in 3 years? How fast is this moving, and how much progress are we making?
Very good question. So with that, I would invite everyone who is interested in this technology to our interoperability working group, which is a DIF-initiated project inviting all communities working on decentralized identity to create a place where we come together every week and discuss where we are and what are needed to reach interoperability, because that's the key. If we don't have interoperability, we have siloed systems. The answer to, so this is I'm gonna post the sign up link into the chat. It's gonna take place next week, Wednesday at 9 a.m. ET time. So 15th of June, 9 a.m. ET. And it's a complicated answer because there are certain service providers who are capable of serving their clients, but since there is no complete interoperability in place yet, they are believing that there is going to be interoperability, so they will be more than a silo. This is the very honest answer. There are a lot of movements that this is going to take place. I can't put a date on it, but many of the pieces are usable today. It's more on standardization processes take a lot of time to make it very standardized. And that makes work with them a bit more complicated because they tend to change until the last moment because more and more information is added. So if someone is very interested to learn more, next Wednesday is the best moment. Thank you.
Super. And I see that Snorre had wanted to maybe add something to that.
Yeah, as an implementer of the technology, we see that, as Balazs says, there's a lot of steps that has to come before you truly get SSI and interoperability in place. But I think one of the most crucial parts is about getting the knowledge about the base layer here, which is the decentralized identity and verifiable credentials, and start building solutions that can be pulled out into a more interoperable layer where when the standards are in place, and building basically that bridge we need to get, not have to wait until everything is ready to start, but start when now that we have certain standards defined and ready to use. And kind of we have to learn from implementing. We cannot learn from speculating. So that's my key point.
I think there's the difference between, I think, some of the ultimate vision of what we want to achieve and certain compromise along the way. So the verifiable credential is a standard which already has been signed off end of last year in WCC. So companies are actually building on that stuff. DIDs are also getting more and more mature, and more companies are implementing this. And like not only some startups, but also like big organizations. So even like the last 2 years, like IBM, Microsoft, and other big names are putting effort on this kind of technology. So it's maturing. Do we have the ultimate place that everybody has their own mobile phone or something else to do all this stuff? I think that's more years away, but I think practical use cases can already happen now. That's really
great. Thanks, Rouven. Rouven, do you want to answer the 2 questions that we had from participants about POCs to port SO data to SSI DIDs, and then is there a relationship between this system and PGP?
Yeah. So maybe I start with the PGP one. So I think the main difference, what DIDs allow you to do is you can rotate your keys over time. So the benefit here is in many cases, depending on the implementation, you use a blockchain, but because you're in control, you have like one quote-unquote central system, which is your blockchain backend system. So you can add multiple keys, you can remove keys, you can define logic, like which key can do what. So PGP was, let's say, a simpler system. If you want to revoke your PGP key, you need to tell a server, which is not necessarily under your control, but maybe run from a university or something else. So it puts more control and more ability for you to use that identifier over time. And the associated keys to this identifier are under your control, and you can define many things. So it's something many people from that old PGP world actually like. The second thing around the SSO data, it really depends. So DIDs are emerging now. More and more companies are like implementing based on DIDs. What we have done, and I will cover this, is like OpenID Connect is one of the like open standards what people can use. So we have built, and we are working together with the OpenID Connect Foundation, like how we merge this two technology into something. We have already a specification for this. So this is kind of happening. The data itself gets really valuable in the moment when the authority who collects the data will actually issue it to you. So that means, let's say if you have collected lots of data with your current SSO provider, it would be them to create credentials and issue this information. So the credential, the core thing is it's signed, and it's signed from the key from the issuer. So if you have an employer who will sign that you work for them, or your bank will sign that you have a certain amount of whatever money on your bank account, this is data. And as long as you trust the issuer, the bank or the employer, then this data gets very valuable. So like just exporting data without it being signed is therefore not as beneficial.
Great, thanks, Rouven. There's another question, but I think we should address it after you present a little bit more in depth the work of the foundation as it relates to how does it compare with other foundations, et cetera. And I'll keep Ricardo's question for the end.
Perfect. Okay, so you can see my screen now?
Yes, thank you.
So the Decentralized Identity Foundation's vision or mission is really around making this all reality. So the vision is, as we just talked about, like building systems which allow entities, we call them entities because obviously humans, but it can also be devices or robots or whatever you want to gain control of their identities. And the second piece here is this trusted interactions. Balázs mentioned it, like if you want to log in, if you want to interact with someone, ultimately it's all about building a reputation around you. So your identity is this identifier, but it's also like who you're interacting with, what kind of things you have done, because all of that builds some form of reputation. And if you interact with people in a trusted way, that's important from a privacy and so on perspective. So what Div is, it's a place for the community to really collaborate on building these systems. We want to be as neutral as possible, inclusive as possible, obviously. So neutral in terms of like, it's not about one technology stack. We have companies from all type of backgrounds, small and big, different blockchains, non-blockchains, everything is welcomed as long as we're all aiming for the same goal. The foundation is there to really drive and cultivate ideas up to the point that we have them described in some form of specifications. So we can then use the specifications to implement them in our different solutions and prove interoperability. I want to stress this interoperability piece because it's not only about like, okay, you can send it stuff between each other. It's important that from day one, we have systems which can interact with each other so that you're not in your silo. If you build another, whatever, WhatsApp, and you can just communicate with your network and you can just build your reputation in your network, we're doing the same thing the world has done before. So interoperability is a core capability in this world. It's not only interoperability, but also portability. So you want to be, from day one, able to switch your provider. We all have seen this the first 10 years. We had a phone number, you couldn't move away. If you switch from provider one to provider B, you always had a new phone number. Now you can, but move your email address from one to the other. It's way harder because it wasn't designed for like moving things around. So interoperability is really important, and we want to not just talk about this, we actually want to demonstrate. So that's a very core thing. It's all about open source contributions and that we make sure that we have the right legal structures in place, that there are no patent restrictions or anything, that people can actually adopt this in their open source or commercial offerings without any restriction. So we want to, from day one, avoid that certain companies can influence with patents into that stack and then monetize this. So it's very crucial. I know it's maybe boring, but this kind of things are very important for us to make sure that this technology can really thrive. And one question came already up, like how do we work with WCC? So the collaboration with standardization bodies is core. We are not trying to build a competing place. What we want to do is we want to create lots of this specifications. And if we think there's a better place like WCC or IETF or other places, then we will hand over these emerging specifications to them to then ratify them and make them like global standards. So just the background, we're part of the Linux Foundation. So we founded 3 years ago. So Linux Foundation is this umbrella organization which hosts now lots of different projects. Hyperledger's in there, Trust over IP Foundation, which came up in the chat, I will talk about in a second, and then Div, we're all like sister projects under the same umbrella. We have more than 100 members, and we have a very interactive and active community now. Lots of like technical working groups, and I will talk about them mainly later. But we have also open groups where we talk about glossary, like educational things and like other aspects. But technical stuff is kind of in the center of Div. So this is a perspective of like the scope from one angle. We're here talking about basically, people often like refer this now also in the Trust over IP community about the 4-layer stack. The lower 3 layers are all aspects which Div is working on. So on the lowest level is what we talked about, DIDs. They're anchored usually in blockchains. It's what many people think is like, needs to be some kind of like public good or some infrastructure in the world where everybody can use them. Layer 2 is about the communication between 2 identities. So DIDCOM is one of the technologies which is going to be specified and developed within Div. It's about interaction and communication in a secure way between two DIDs. And we want to do this on all kind of transport layers. So you can use this over the internet or over Bluetooth or something else. DITCOM does not require that it's IP based. So one of the reasons for this is we want to allow that you have more transparency, or sorry, more privacy, online. So the interactions of two identities should not be able to be monitored from whatever governments and others. So it's a core capability on that level. And layer 3 is about once we have established the connection between two identities, how do we exchange information, these credentials? How do I ask for the right credentials? How do I give them out? How do you specify the whole interactions? How do I minimize the information shared, but establishing the trust between these entities? And all these 3 layers are part of working groups we are covering. This is another angle, I think Balázs mentioned it. So this is something where I wanted just to highlight, there's more stuff involved than the 3 layers. Here, identifier and discovery is an element where, like, how do I even find the necessary metadata about an identity? How do I read from that specific blockchain? How do I discover certain, I don't know, additional information I need to establish the trust? We talked about the data and the portability. So defining how we store data in a way that it can have these properties that you can synchronize it to other places so you avoid censorship. You can port the data from one to the other. So the interoperability on the data is crucial. DIT methods allow you to rotate keys. So that's kind of another crucial mechanism for you to change keys, change phones, change wallets. DIT auth, I mentioned, is how you authenticate two services using your DID, and that DITCOM already covered. So this agents and wallets is something which happens in multiple places at the moment. It's not just in Div, but it's like, how do you maintain and manage keys, and like, what's the software people are using to actually empower the individuals or companies to do that. So a little bit more what these working groups are. So these are like the major working groups. And there are just some of the work items. I will not go into details of them, but for example, this universal resolver is like the DNS. So it's one system which allows you to find the data, like the information from different blockchains and there's different DIT methods. Well-known configuration is something where certain companies said, we have an internet today, so why are we not using, let's say, I don't know, google.com/DID as like the foundation. So this is more for bootstrapping the system to make it very practical for companies to use the actual DNS system and the traditional certificate authorities to establish the trust and combine them with DID. So that's kind of like a nice onboarding path in this direction. There are key recovery mechanisms. It might be that some of these work items become bigger and then become their own independent working groups, like key management is one topic which we discussed recently. So Sitetree is a mechanism where a few startups, but also Microsoft is developing a technology which is a layer 2 stack. So many of you are in the blockchain space know, like, blockchains have a certain limitations, obviously, on scalability. And if you talk about millions and billions of identities, whether it's for people or for devices, you need to have other mechanisms to scale more. So like Sitetree is one of the first specifications which have been developed in Div, defining a layer 2 mechanism, but then connecting them with, for example, Bitcoin and Ethereum as public blockchains. So it's a really interesting technology. We talked about the OpenID Connect mechanisms around DIT auth. And on credentials, there's a lot of work happening with zero-knowledge proofs. So how do we minimize the information you share? So assuming your employer gives you a whole set about you and your credentials, how do you just submit or provide a subset of the necessary information? And you can do this with different protocols, and zero-knowledge proofs are like one capability to do this. I talked about DITCOM and the secure data stuff. And Balázs already mentioned it. We have started this a year and a half ago, but we reinitiated this recently. It's really like an effort across the industry. So Div is hosting lots of this work, but the World Wide Web Consortia is doing lots of the technical work. They have like community groups and DITs and verifiable credential specifications are happening there. But it's also companies like My Data or like organizations like My Data. They are doing a lot of stuff around governance on data, data privacy, and so on. Solid is another project which is working on data. Hyperledger has different projects like Indy, Ares, and so on. And Ares actually has started, like DITCOM started in Hyperledger Ares and is now a joint working group at Diff. The storage was happening in Diff, Hyperledger, and World Wide Web Consortium. So we're kind of merging all of these things now. So the working groups are often cross ecosystem already. And Trust over IP came up as a question as well. It's a very new organization that's just launched, I think, 4 or 5 weeks ago. We actually are in conversation with them how we separate and collaborate well. The core thing of Trust over IP is around governance. So they want to define governance frameworks and tools, like how and who, which kind of credentials can you trust? Like what are the necessary legal frameworks and other things that need to be in place, whilst Diff is more focused on the technical aspects of the work. Oops. And then the last one was more how you can get more information. We recently opened up Diff, so companies with less than 1,000 people can all join for free. There's lots of things going on GitHub, mailing lists, and so on. So feel free to join. We love to have more contributions and people who are interested to work with us.
Thanks, Rouven, for this very thorough presentation. I have a question for you. If I'm a developer, you know, how do I engage with Diff? And then also if I'm someone who's more on sort of the foundation side, social impact, or, you know, I work in with populations who would benefit from this technology, is Diff my go-to foundation, and how do I interact with them?
Yeah. I think as a developer, I think Diff is likely the best place because we have such a diverse set of companies, engineers, and very active work on GitHub. So check out GitHub. There's lots of this information out there. Join the newsletter and just join, ideally, Diff. So there's lots of working groups. So if you're just interested in DITCOM or just in the storage, you can just join Diff and just join this one working group. So we're like separating this depending on your interest. The effort there is very connected with some of the other industry things. So we can point you to, I don't know, WCC if you're more interested in the specifications on DIDs. So we want to make Diff as a good starting point for people, but then point them. So we're collaborating well with some of the others. In terms of is it a place for like a foundation and then social impact and so on? We actually this morning talked about launching one other working group, which is an ethics and privacy group. So all the things, all the things which you think are wrong with this technology, like what are the things we could envision people might misuse this for? So what can we do? So this is just one example, but we also are at the moment working on the concept of use case or special interest groups where if you are interested in a certain industry, supply chain or something else, that we bring people together to define what are the needs and the requirements. I think what we learned with many people in this use case is that many people talk about blockchain, but you can use DIDs and verifiable credentials to achieve lots of the benefits of a blockchain by using data being signed associated to a DID, and you just anchor it into a blockchain if it's really required. So lots of the people who started in blockchain think this capability is extremely interesting combined with blockchain. So it's a very, I think, enriching the thing. So I think it's interesting for use case interested people as well.
Interesting. And so we didn't prepare the questions, but I have a questions for the 3 panelists. Where do you see decentralized identity in 5 years? What does success look like for you guys, either as a founder, as representative of a foundation that brings together people? Like, what is your perspective on that?
I go first. I actually have a talk where in Norway where I say, what's digital identity in 5 years? and then I present SSI. So,
Question for you then.
yeah. No, I hope that we have gotten as far as we really want to, as we're talking about today. I truly believe that there will still be countries that will lag behind. We see that as well. Like Norway is super far ahead in payment and digital identity, and the whole world hasn't catch up yet. So it's like we're now the country that's lagging behind in this scenario, because I see no one interested in SSI in Norway because we have it so comfortable with this current solution we have. So it's a very interesting. You'll see kind of like a pendulum effect going back and forth, but I believe in 5 years you will see countries really going strong on this and using it as part of their core infrastructure for identity management.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest in particular in the educational space. So I see there's a lot of like different use cases which are much easier to start with, because having your digital self-identity system for like less risky use cases will be a very good start. There's lots of companies who even start B2B use cases using DIDs and verifiable credentials. So I think this will mature. We see that DHS, like Homeland Security, is starting startups to mature the tech. There's the European Union is like at the moment giving out grants for people to do this. There are like national efforts in Germany, Finland, Austria, and other places to build up like national systems. I think that which might defeat what some people think under true self-sovereignness. But the core thing is because of the interoperability. So if the technology stack is using verifiable credentials and DIDs, this is extremely important because it needs to have universities to issue credentials. It needs to have like, it's a shift over time. So the good thing is like big organizations like even Workday and Microsoft has GitHub and LinkedIn. They're all like, I think, already working on these kind of like concepts. So if we start with some of the use cases just to get the tech out there, while some entrepreneurs are really pushing the boundaries of like making it extremely user-friendly to switch your keys. I think the hardest part for me is making it end user-friendly to deal with key recovery and mechanisms. So that's, I think, the hardest part, which I think there are some good ideas, but this is not matured enough. But today you can store your key on whatever iCloud. If it's just for like showing, like onboarding to a website and show your driver license or something else. Actually, Apple announced a patent last week about this, but there's a bunch of these kind of activities which are happening first. And I think in the next 5 years, we will see that people are more comfortable to actually use this tech, and also that individuals can hold this. So we can see cooler use cases, like maybe simple voting things, or maybe, I don't know, more relevant identity, use cases. I think the limits are pretty.
I also think that we will definitely see a switch in some business models, at least a mindset of how business models online will be driven. We will not get rid of marketing in 5 years, but we will see a different mindset that has to be figured out, because this is a completely different way of handling data.
Yeah, Balazs? And I have other questions from the audience.
Overall, I think like I can agree with everything what the guys said before. And for me, like sort of non-working for a for-profit company, really, I'm all in on, we have to make interoperability happen. So without that, a lot of those things that we talked about will matter a little, because we are recreating another siloed system. So I'm repeating myself here, but I think this is the key to move forward. And I really, really honestly invite everyone to join us and help to speed up that effort, because then we can have an actual decentralized identity system.
Great, thank you. And then I had a question from Christopher, which I think touches upon two things which are, obvious, but we didn't talk about them in detail today is one, the monetization of identities by large tech companies and the marketing cycle, and two, the control over privacy of governments. And the question, and those two are tensions that come into the debate. And the question from the audience was, why do you think the nation states will sort of give up control over this identity management? And if they use the ideas, do they really give up control? So who wants to go first?
I'm very eager. Sorry, I started off. I have an organization in Norway called Digital Identity Nordics, and that was with representatives from the Digitalization Directorate of Norway, who are the ones running the Governmental Identity Foundation. And what they're saying is that, to be honest, we don't want to run this, but we see us as the people who shall run it, because that's the only possibility we have. But if we can get a solution that can be run purely on tech and we can be more of a governance body, that would suit us much, much better than being what we're currently doing. So that's my point of view there.
I think many governments are actually quite supportive. I think when you separate the things, like if the user is in control of their DID and of their keys, that it's not that someone else loses control. It's like the user is controlling, like I can control my phone. Nobody has my phone. So what I send to someone on my phone is something, maybe there are limits, but what the core thing of the trust is that the data, the credentials are issued still from the authority. So if like still whatever the DMV in the United States can still issue that I have a driver license, that's not something they lose the control over. It's like I hold something in my wallet and I can't decide whether I share it or not. That's under my control. So I think the control aspect is less of the concern. And we see, I've talked with like governmental people in Canada, in the Netherlands, in like Germany, many want this, or like, because it's not taking anything away besides that you are powering individuals. I think there will be certain governance expectations to what systems to be used, or maybe some kind of like stamp to say, we believe this is a secure system for like whatever. In other countries, they signed off like, is this tracking up now privacy? Okay, is the government giving you like a stamp on this? I think that's something we will see. But ultimately, I think it's even in the interest for many governments to say, okay, people are empowered to interact, and it's not the control of the government to, I don't know, act on any of these things.
Yeah. And also, of course, we have different governments with different cultures, so we can't say everybody will do it. But we have seen that once we get lawyers on board, once we get lawyers understanding this technology, we'll see reports like Evernym was able to produce in the UK, saying that, okay, the current system we have of trust and security, the ID and verifiable credentials can basically fit directly into that law system. Without any issues, because they are defining, they're able to cover all aspects of the law in that current scenario, which was quite interesting to see that you can basically take this technology and put it into the existing law judicial system.
Great. And the last question, so that we close our conversation, is DIF involved with the COVID credentials initiative?
We are in contact with them. We have actually one of their representatives joins our bi-weekly calls. We discussed whether we are opening a working group within DIF for this, but DIF is more building the underlying like capabilities, and COVID is one use case on top. So what we want to make sure is that they're not replicating and building other tech, but ultimately it's one use case. People are using the core protocols we're developing.
Super. Well, I want to thank our speakers today. It was a great conversation. We learned a lot. Thank you so much for your time. And we'll be sending the recording and the slides and the contact details, as well as the working group information today or tomorrow, as soon as I receive the recording. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.